If you had all the power in the universe, would you give it up to become human and die for people who hated you? It's an interesting thought to kind of peruse. Would you give up all of that power to become weak and mortal and frail? And we might say, well, okay, maybe. But I mean, we really have to think about what that statement means. All the power in the universe. How many of us would even be willing to give up even a smidge of that? You know, once you see people that have lots of power, what do? I mean, any sort of possibility of them losing a slight grasp on it, on at least some of it, causes them great anxiety. And things happen. You know, you got dictators in the world that when they start seeing threats to their power, what do? They run around and gather everybody up and kill them just on the possibility that they might be someone that's a threat to taking some of their power. You know, how many of us could honestly say that we would, you know, be willing to give up all of that power? And I think the answer is if we're really truly honest, none of us would really be willing to give up that power. This morning we're going to look at what Jesus, the master teacher, had as King of Heaven. And we're going to look at what he gave up to live as a suffering human servant and what it meant to be God in a human body. We a lot of times don't think about that very much. We just read the passages. Jesus became human, dwelt among men. We really don't think very much about the implications of that, because we know what it's like to be here, but we don't know what it was like to be there. And we don't always give real thought to what exactly it was that he gave up and how much he gave up. Would someone please turn to Philippians 2, verses 5 through 11 and read that for me, please? Philippians 2, 5 through 11.
Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. And being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. Wherefore God also has highly exalted him, and given him a name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, of things in heaven, things on earth, things under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father.
Okay, thank you, brother. This passage actually follows something that many scholars call what's called an inverted parallel structure. And the reason it's an inverted parallel structure is because it starts off and it sort of illustrates where Jesus was at and then his descent down to humanity and then his reascent back up into heaven again. And so it has this particular structure. So it's Christ existed in the divine form. He didn't exploit his equality with God. He emptied himself. He took human form. And so you see him coming from heaven down to earth. And then it says, and then he was obedient to the point of death. And then the last step is he's exalted by God. And all of these 6 points that I just gave you are parallels of each other as they work into that thing. It's kind of an interesting structure, and it's a mental illustration to show the process that what went on. So we're going to do just real briefly a little Greek word analysis, and we're going to take some time to examine a couple of these key Greek words from our reading. Now, if anyone wants the actual Greek words, then you can come see me after class and I'll give to you those. But I suspect if you want the Greek words, you already know how to look them up yourself. So That's going to be available to you, but I'm not going to give them to you. We'll just talk about the English words. So in this verse 6, where it says, who being in the form of God, this Greek word here is just, it's illustrating not the outward appearance, but the essential nature. So what it's saying here is this is the essential nature, okay? It wasn't that he was sort of God. It wasn't that he looked like God. It's that he was God, because we know what makes up God, right, is his characteristics. The characteristics define who God is. And so he's saying here, no, in his form, he was God, which could throw a little wrench in the works for some denominational folks, and particularly Jehovah's Witnesses when it comes to that. So it's an affirmation of full and complete divinity. And then it says, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. And this really here, this word, it's a very rare word in the New Testament. I think it only happens here. And the idea of it's something to be exploited. So Christ didn't exploit his God status for personal advantage. So in other words, he said, okay, yeah, I'm God, but I'm going to set some of that stuff aside in order to do what I need to do. I'm not going to hold on to that. And we see how he does that throughout his life. For instance, in Matthew 26:53, he says, do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? Well, prior to his incarnation, if Christ wanted to send 12 legions of angels, what would he have done? He would have done it. He had the power to do it. But now on earth, he's saying, no, I don't have the authority because I have given some of that up. Now, I can ask my Father to do it, but I've given up that authority. I'm in complete submission and subjection to my Father. So that's one of the things that he kind of set aside. And we'll see a few others in a little bit. Verse 7 says he emptied himself. He didn't empty himself of divinity. He did not empty himself of God, but he set aside the privileges and glory and rights of being God. And we've already seen that a little bit with the verse that we just looked at. So it doesn't mean that he's not God. You know, I can do certain things and set aside certain privileges and everything else. I don't have to exercise all the privileges of being a human being. I can set some of those aside for somebody else. You know, I could be a, Nobel laureate winner in physics, and yet I could go into a classroom and start teaching and say, you know what? I'm going to allow this other person to teach this class, and I'm going to sit in here as a student, and I'm going to listen. And I don't have to speak up, and I don't have to participate. I can sit here and listen while this other person speaks. Maybe not the best example, but there's all sorts of areas where we can do that. And certainly in our marital relationships, a lot of times we put certain authorities aside sometimes for different purposes. And that's the way it goes in life sometimes. But he puts those aside, and he does that voluntarily in order to become human. Remember what Matthew 24:36 says, but concerning that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. Another thing that he set aside. Before he would have known all of those things, but he set all of that aside. And by taking the form of a servant. Now this word form here is the same Greek word as in verse 6, reinforcing that he took on the essential nature of being a servant. Not just the outward, not the outward part. Can you be a servant outwardly, but not inwardly? Yeah, you can pretend, right? People go to work all the time and pretend like they like their company and they like their boss, but inside they really don't. That happens all the time. But it's saying, inwardly he truly was a servant, and not just one on the outside. Now, this word servant here literally means slave. It's not an indentured servant, it's a slave. And it's one who is completely subject to the will and desires and authority of another. They have absolutely zero rights of their own. Zero rights. And I think everybody's heard before that a Roman head of a household, if he did not like a slave, if the slave just looked at him sideways, he was by law allowed to take the slave out into the courtyard, put up a cross, and crucify him right then and there. And there was no recourse, no legal recourse, because the slaves had absolutely zero rights under Roman law. And so that's this concept here of not having any rights at all. It's about ownership and subjection. And this was all freely chosen by Christ. I mean, do you get the idea maybe that, when they were talking about this in heaven and, the Father said, well, you're going to have to, give up a lot of yourself and you're going to have to kind of, be in complete subjection and everything else. You have to give a bunch of stuff up. Do you think Christ is going, is there some other way of doing that? I don't get that concept at all. This is all known from the beginning, and it was I see it as just as a matter of fact. If we're going to do this, this is what's going to have to happen. Yep, okay, let's go make it happen. So you got to look and you got to say, we have this calling of the angels again. It still shows, a slave could not call the angels, could he? The slave would have to go to the master and ask for that to happen. Have to go to the father to ask for that to happen. So how many of us would voluntarily become a physical slave? I mean, some of us might volunteer to be an indentured servant just in order to survive. But very few of us would willingly do that and willingly do it for someone else. Willingly do it for an enemy. So why did Jesus do it? Well, perhaps one reason is maybe the master teacher was illustrating to us in his life what we had to do. He put himself in complete slaveship subjection to the Father in order to be pleasing to the Father and to achieve a set outcome. What do we have to do? In order to gain salvation, what do we have to do? The same thing, right? Put ourselves in complete slave ownership of God. And I know the term slave is, pretty abhorrent to all of us, but in this case it is a biblical term and conveys a very set idea. In verse 8 we see this word form again, and being found in human form. And this is different from the ones seen in verses 6 and 7. And this really refers to outward appearance. Goes with outward appearance. And it affirms that he was fully, recognizably human. So another little thing in the works for some of these heretical religions that say that he didn't come in bodily form. Okay? That he was just a spirit. He was a phantasm. All right? Well, the Greek basically says, you're wrong. That's not what it was. We knew him physically, and that's how he came. So we have true essence of God, which does not change. Physical appearance, which, when we look at this Greek form, that can. So in other words, it allows for aging and things like that. But the true essence of God does not change. And he humbled himself. And it's an active verb which indicates that he chose lowliness. And remember, all of this was foreknown beforehand, before creation. And yet, and this is the thing that just always amazes me, the Godhead knew all of this that was going to happen. And he knew that the Son was going to have to be sent to die. And he knew all of these things were going to happen. He knew all the people were going to reject him. And yet he still did what? He still created us. And that just, every time I think about it, it's just like, okay, I guess it's good that I'm not God, because I sure wouldn't be going down that path one little bit. So this passage shows Christ's pre-existence and full deity. It shows his voluntary humiliation, his true humanity, and that obedience was necessary for our redemption. Now we want to look at this transition from king to slave. We'll call it the Great Descent. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of contrast what it was like for him in heaven with his life on earth. And so you're probably going to help me a little bit with this. So the first side of the first column we have is King of Heaven and all the things he had as King of Heaven. And over on the right-hand side, we've got what life was like for him on earth. So we'll see if you can pick up. There's an opposite here. So we'll start with the first one. Isaiah 6:1 says he was seated on a throne in heaven. What was his lot on earth? He was born in a stable, from a throne to a stable, right? How many of us want to do that? How many of you want to move from a $500,000 house to a $30 mobile home? Anybody want to do that? And nobody says I want to downgrade like that. You know, oh, I've got a new car. I'm sick of it. I want to buy a 30-old-year-old car now. You know, it just doesn't work that way. Revelation 5:11 through 12 says he was worshipped by angels. What was his lot on earth? What's that? Y'all have to speak up. Ridicule. Thank you. Yes. Mocked by the soldiers, right? The leaders, the Jewish leaders mocked him. His own family sometimes kind of gave him a hard time too. John 17:5, he had eternal glory. What did he have on earth? Isaiah 53:2 says he had no beauty or majesty. This great beauty in heaven, what does he have here on earth? You know, no one's even paying attention to him. He's just an average Joe. You know, you wouldn't even notice him if you're walking down the street. 2 Corinthians 8:9, possessor of all riches. What was it like for him on earth? He was poor, right? No place to lay his head, and the only thing he had was the clothes on his back. And some sandals, I guess. Matthew 26:53, he commanded angel armies. What did he have on earth? Yeah, and basically the armies were all against him on earth, weren't they? He was arrested and hauled off. Revelation 5:13 receives heaven's praise. What did he get on earth? Yeah, mocking, ridicule. I mean, there were small numbers of people, but the majority, right? The majority mocked him and ridiculed him. 1 Timothy 6:16, he was immortal. What did he end up getting on earth? Death, right? Death. Colossians 1:16 and 17, he's the creator and sustainer of all. What did he get on earth? He was a carpenter in a backwater town, right? And even as a prophet, people said, well, you know, nothing good comes out of Nazareth, you know. Revelation 11:15, he reigns in power. What was his lot on earth? Yeah. He ended up on a cross again, didn't he? Matthew 5:17, he gave the law. He was the lawgiver. What did he end up doing on earth? Did he keep the law? Yeah, he was obedient to the law. Obedient to the law that he wrote. And really, did he have to be obedient to that law? Yeah, yes and no, in a sense, right? So, things Jesus gave up in becoming a man. One of the things he did is he gave up that divine glory, that visible majesty, and he set aside all of that visible display of glory to become a man. I mean, can you imagine being in heaven, this heaven scene that we imagine, the light radiating from this throne where Jesus is at with all the praise and adoration and just the beauty that, you know, I mean, we've already been told we can't see God and live. So that tells you something about that glory, right? And going from that to earth as a man. you want to talk about culture shock? Okay, huge culture shock going on with that. And I've been through culture shock, and it's not necessarily good, but nothing at all like what he went through. And he makes a statement in John 17:5. He says, "And now, Father, glorify me in your own presence with the glory that I had with you before the world existed." That's a really touching statement. He's saying, God, I miss that I had with you. I missed us being together and reigning as king over heaven. You know, I please, get me back home where I belong quickly. He gave up his independent uses of divine attributes. He didn't hold on to those things. John 5:19 says the Son can do nothing of his own accord, but only what he sees the Father doing. How would it be to be that powerful then and not be able to use it? That would be frustrating, wouldn't it? It would kind of drive you crazy. Heavenly status and position as sovereign rights. 2 Corinthians 8:9, though he was rich, for your sake he became poor, so that by his poverty you might become rich. How many times do you think rich people give away all their money to poor people so that the poor people can become rich? Now, they might do it after they die, right? But they don't do it while they're living. They may give some of it, but they don't give all of it. He gave up immunity to weakness and suffering. He took on that human weakness, suffering, hunger, thirst, fatigue, and temptation. In John 19:28, he said, I thirst. Did Jesus pre-incarnate ever get thirsty? Not in heaven, he didn't. He didn't get thirsty there at all. He gave up heavenly worship. Look at what happens with celebrities, real popular celebrities. And they get used to all of these accolades and people shouting, you're the greatest, and concerts and everything else. And then they fall off the face of the earth with no popularity anymore. Nobody even knows they exist anymore. What happens to them? And usually they go off into drugs or alcohol or commit suicide or, live on the streets or whatever it is. They crash, don't they? That's a huge transition for them to make. And Jesus went from something much better than what they ever have, those celebrities have, and he came to this, to really not getting any of that sort of stuff that he did in heaven. John 1:10-11 says, he was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. Just the contrast there. The people didn't receive him. Who made the people? He did. I created you, and they said, well, you're not my God. Right? You can say that all day long, but you're not my God. I'm not going to listen to you. Well, how's that going to make you feel? He left a sinless environment. Can you imagine leaving the sinless environment of heaven and all the beauty of all that and then coming to earth? Now we look around us and we go, oh, this is a beautiful place. Yeah, there's things about it that are beautiful. But is it perfect? Is anything perfect? Try growing a plant on a pot on your patio. Simple thing. Right? Simple little thing. And you go out there and you plant the dirt and you sterilize the pot and you put the fertilizer in it and you plant the thing and you water it like you're supposed to, and then what happens in a couple days? A bug gets it, right? Oh, now I got to spray the plant. You take care of the bug. It's looking a little bit better now. A couple of days later, it gets a fungus. Got to spray the plant. Oops, one day you forget to water it, it wilts. Another day, some worms get into it. Another day, the rabbit comes in the yard and chews up the plant. And then something happens with it, and it's supposed to have all these flowers on it, and it never has flowers on it. And you've been sitting out working on all this stuff. That's just a plant in the pot. Spread that across all of this earth. right? You wash your car. What's it look like the next day, this time of year? Everybody's car's yellow, right? Everybody gets a yellow car this time of year. So he walked down into this, walked down to being this place just jam-packed with sin. He gave up his divine rights and privileges, and as a lawgiver himself, remember what he did when it came to paying taxes. He paid the taxes. Again, even though he really didn't have to pay those taxes. Immortality, he gave that up. And he gave up autonomous glory and honor, and he accepted shame, mockery, and betrayal, which was in stark contrast to the honor that he was due. So you see how he had all of these great things, and he put all of those things aside for something bad that was going to reach a good outcome for us. And I just don't think we always appreciate that contrast of what he gave up. You know, because we think, well, he came to Earth. Earth isn't such a bad place. We've got Hawaii and some other nice places like that. Pretty days like this. But even pretty days like this would be ugly in heaven, I guarantee you. What it meant to be God in a human body. Well, the Word became flesh. He took on a body that could feel pain. As God, he had never known physical pain, not even mild discomfort. He had never even slept on his arm wrong and had it go to sleep. Okay? Because God doesn't sleep. You know, all those little minor things. Can you imagine being a being that had never ever had pain in your whole life? Now you're 50 years old. Never had an ache, never had a headache, never bumped your arm on anything, never felt 1 ounce of pain. And then one night, in the middle of the night, you get up to go to the bathroom and you stub your toe on the side of the bed. What impact would that have on you? You would probably think you're dying, right? Call the ambulance. I'm dying. I'm in the throes of death right now. I'm watching for the Grim Reaper to come around the corner and take me. Right? Well, you know, but that's because you had never experienced it before. And God had never felt the physical experience of human pain. And to me, that is something that's amazing. He had skin that could bleed, feel splinters from a carpenter's shop, get blisters on his feet from sandals that didn't fit too well, felt the cold wind, felt being cold. You know, we go out in the cold and we're like, oh, it's cold out today. Imagine somebody who never felt cold. And what's amazing is that he created nerve endings in human beings that would feel pain only to have his pierced and whipped. So during this whole human creation process, the Godhead is going, well, we're creating this, but you also know that you're going to be in this body one day, and all the things that we're creating here, you're going to have to be a part of. You know, maybe me as God created, well, maybe we'll leave out the nerve endings thing so it won't hurt so bad. He took on a body that could grow weary. You know, the one who never slept now felt exhaustion. He slept in storms. He grew weary from travel, and he stood for hours upon hours to teach in the hot sun. He felt soreness and mental fatigue. Remember in John 4:6, he stopped at the well in Samaria for what reason? He was tired, right? He was tired and thirsty, probably right along with it. He took on hunger, thirst, and physical need. He experienced having a dry mouth, an empty stomach, and human cravings. You know, we take all these things for granted. We don't think about them, but Jesus, before he became flesh, had never experienced any of that sort of stuff. You know, and do you think getting hungry could be kind of annoying the first couple of times? Well, he was born as a baby, so you know he had time to get used to that one. But here's a kind of a thought point. He was the bread of life, wasn't he? But the bread of life got hungry. And he was living water. But the living water got what? Got thirsty. Yeah. He took on a body that could get sick and wounded. He bruised, he blistered, he broke, he got sick, he got headaches. Okay? Every sort of illness, every sort of category of illness, Jesus would have experienced those illnesses. And we don't think about that very much, right? We don't ever think about Jesus having a headache. May have been one day maybe while he's teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, he had a really blasting headache from dehydration or something. It's speculation, but we know, right? If we experience it humans, then he experienced it. And then he was flogged and pierced and crowned with thorns and nailed to wood. The thing to think about here is the maker of matter was torn apart by it. His enemies took the products that he created and used them as weapons to kill him. It's just amazing when you think about some of the parallels with these things. He took on a body that could die. He breathed the air he had made. But then Luke 23:46 tells us that he surrendered that breath. The immortal wrapped himself in mortality, and he faced the terror of death. Think about this. He started his life as a brand new baby with someone trying to kill him. An innocent child. And he's already got somebody trying to kill him. Totally innocent. And he went through his life, and he died. People finally got their way, and he died. He was murdered. And yet he was still what? Innocent. He was still innocent. Still as innocent as what he was when he was born as a baby. He took on emotions, griefs, and temptation. He wept. He was abandoned by friends and disciples, misunderstood by family. He was hated by leaders. Just because he knew that Peter was going to deny him. Do you think that lessened the pain any? Sometimes I think we kind of think, well, he knew it was going to happen, so it's like, okay, let's wait for it to happen. Okay, it's happened now. I knew it was going to happen.
Can you imagine the look that he gave Peter after the third time?
Yeah, I think you have to look, and you got human looks, and then you got Jesus human looks. And I'm not sure which one he fell into. I suspect that the look that Peter got from Jesus was not an angry look, but it was a look of sadness. And probably because Jesus knew what that denial was going to do to Peter himself and the pain it was going to cause Peter. But Jesus being human, how do we react when someone betrays us? How do we act when someone turns against us or throws us under the bus, as commonly said? We don't take it well at all, do we? We're incredibly hurt, and if we're made in the likeness of God and experience emotions that God gave us, then Jesus was human. So what did Jesus feel when Peter denied him? He felt betrayed. And it would have hurt. Even though he knew it was coming. You can know something's coming. You can know a loved one's got terminal cancer and they're not going to be with you a whole much longer. And you can know for years that it's coming, but when it finally happens, does that lessen the blow? No. It really doesn't. It just gives you a little bit more time to adapt to it. In Gethsemane, we see his extreme sorrow and fear of abandonment. He felt temptation through his whole physical life. Imagine his emotions when he was being tempted in the wilderness by Satan. Satan had rebelled against him in heaven, been booted out, right? So Satan was a rebellious person that was attempting to destroy Jesus and the kingdom and anything else he could do to keep God from getting what he wanted to do. And Satan, the one he's sitting here talking to right now during this temptation, is the very reason why he has to come to earth and die. He's talking to this dude, and he's the one that's the cause of him having, plus us humans, right? We don't get off, we don't get to say the devil made me do it. Satan and us corrupted the earth, corrupted ourselves, and made it necessary for Jesus to give up everything that he had to come to earth and die for us to correct our mistakes. And he knows what's coming, and he's sitting here talking to Satan with all of this background. Now, what emotions do you suppose are going through his mind as he's sitting here talking to this evil person who has caused all this destruction, caused all this rampant sorrow, and caused so many people, aided in so many people, going to hell? The ones that you love. Every single one of them that you love and you created to be in heaven with you, he's sitting right across the table from you, trying to get you to turn against God. I don't see Jesus just sitting there being kind of all calm and like, yes, but, man does not live by bread alone. I see some real, Jesus was human, so how is he going to react to that? His emotions had to have been heightened during that time, feeling a lot of the same things we did. He shows great control in his answers, but on the inside of his body, his heart was pounding like crazy, just like we do when we get into stressful situations. And I don't think I would have been anywhere near as nice as he was talking to Satan. He lived in sin and suffering, from a heaven for a world filled to a world filled with sin, disease, death, and demonic influence. He touched lepers, walked through slums, and ate with outcasts. He personally observed the horrible effects of sin on the people he created. The light of the world waded into the darkness. He waded into a sewer. And the earth is a sewer. And I'm not trying to put down the beauty of everything we have, but when you talk about sin, it's a sewer. So how many of us want to downgrade in anything in life? Jesus did. The worst downgrade we could think of in life does not compare at all to what he did. I think the worst thing I could ever think of would be living in Hawaii in a beautiful, huge mansion with all my family and everything else, and having all my needs taken care of, and being a Christian and everything else, and then having to move to a slum in Cairo or someplace like that, and be a beggar, and not have my family or my friends or anything. That's pretty drastic, isn't it? That still doesn't compare to the contrast of what Jesus did. And how many of us would do what he did? We might do it for a close family. But who did he do it for? Everybody. Did he do it for the people that hated him? Did he do it for the soldiers that nailed him on the cross? Did he do it for the Jewish leaders who made false testimony against him and played politics in order to get him murdered because he was a threat to their power base? Did he do it for them? Did he do it for Jezebel? Did he do it for the Jezebel mentioned in Revelation? Did he do it for Ahab? Did he do it for the followers of Baal? For the followers of Molech? Did he do it for the Romans who, when they had daughters, they didn't want to have daughters because they were just an expense, and so they'd throw them in a bag and throw them in the Tiber River? Did he do it for them too? And he waded into the cesspool to do that. Why do you think he chose to experience everything and not just the cross. Because he could have just come and said, well, going straight to the cross, getting this over with. Why do you think he chose to experience everything that he did?
So that on Judgment Day could be fair. He knows what we've suffered.
That's one reason. What else? Does the scripture say something about him having lived a life as we did and experienced what we did? And therefore we have someone who can be an advocate for us. And it's also a way for him saying, look, when we pray to him, he can say, I know. I've been there before. I know exactly what you're feeling because it happened to me too. God and the Father in heaven couldn't say that, could he? God on earth in a human body could. He could say, yes, I have been where you are. And I can help you get past this because I got past it too.
He showed us the right way to react to situations.
Right. Right. Yeah. So many great examples of what he did. Now, what's the only reasonable explanation for his actions? For this whole plan of salvation thing and stuff like that, what's the only reasonable explanation for doing all of this? Okay? But even more root base, why did all of this happen? Creation, the whole shooting match. Why are we here? Love. Love. Now, I dare you to try and understand that love. I dare you. Because the more you think about it, and I try to think about it all the time, and all I do is I run into a brick wall. Because it is not the kind of love that I can understand. I have faith that love was that, and that was the motivation. I have faith, but intellectually, I cannot define that kind of love. All the kind of love that we have on this earth with our family and friends is not that same kind of love that he had. It may be a baseline, and maybe a smidge of it, but it's not the depth and full, complete love that he had in doing that. And it astounds me every single time. Philippians 2 doesn't ask us to admire Jesus, it tells us to imitate him. And that's really kind of the takeaway. And of course, Jesus, as the master teacher, imitated his Father as an example to us to imitate him and his Father. We'll close with this. C.S. Lewis once said, "The Son of God became a man to enable men to become sons of God." And another quote was, "He who knew no pain chose pain so we might be freed from it eternally." Jesus truly was and is the master teacher. Thank you.